welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. The resumption of Kailash Mansarovar yatra, cross-border river cooperation and the trade at the Nathula Pass have come in recently. Now, these are some of the points agreed upon in the 6-point peace roadmap between India and China recently, following the implementation of the 21st October disengagement of troops along the LAC in sensitive Demchok and Depsang region in India. China and India have now resumed their special representative dialogues in Beijing. Now, Indian NSA Ajit Doval and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks for the first time in 5 years. They discussed ways to ensure peace on the ground so that border issues don't hold back normal development of bilateral ties between the two countries. For India, China's relationship to be pre-2020 track, there needs to be disengagement, de-escalation and de-induction. Now, disengagement has happened. So, with this 23rd meeting of the two Asian giants, can one see the relationship heading towards the next phase, which is de-escalation, or is this a start of de-escalation? The 6-point peace roadmap mentions Kailash Mansarovar yatra, cross-border river cooperation, trade at Nathula Pass as low-hanging fruits. How will this play out? What needs to be done next? And can one trust China? Or rather, should one trust China? Can there be de-induction? With so much of troop and infra build-up, can there be de-induction on both sides? To discuss all of that, joining me on the show, our former Indian diplomat, Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar. Also with us is Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. In the studio with me is my colleague Nivriti Mohan. Thank you to all of you for taking time out. Nivriti, I want to come to you first. First special representative conversation in 5 years. This is substantive for both India-China relationship.
Yeah, it is substantial because last time when the meeting happened in 2019, you will see that 22 rounds of meetings had happened in those years, starting from 2003 to 2019. And in last 5 years, we had no special representative dialogue during that period because of the Galwan standoff that had happened. And the relations went to a new low. And there were escalation on the borders, on the LAC, engagements had happened on various points. 7 of the friction points were there where the engagement happened in 2020, out of which 5 were resolved, but 2 were still there on which disengagement has recently happened as per the agreement on October 21.
Right.
So now this talk that is happening, the special representative level talks that are happening, is substantial in terms of improving relations, building trust between the two countries. This can be termed as substantial in that manner, but as far as de-escalation is concerned, you cannot say that this is the first step or initial step towards that direction, because that is a long, India and China have a long way to go on that, if at all the trust is maintained between both the countries. And we have experienced at many times, we have had around 5, I think, agreements with China in our history, and all those agreements were hardly respected by China.
Right.
And
so it's hard
because
to,
of
hard
that,
to expect
hard to
China,
trust them.
Yes, to maintain maintain some sort of semblance of trust when it comes to China. Let's take that question from Ambassador Sajanhar. Ambassador, trust is the key word here, and trust is where China needs to prove that this time around they have a sincere intention. Now, both Mr. Doval and Mr. Wang said that it was important to draw from the lessons of the 4-year military standoff. What are these lessons, and can we trust China this time around?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. You're very right. I think that is the crux of the matter. Trust is the crux of the matter, and we've seen time and over again, China has not stuck to what it has said. There's a huge difference between what it says and what it does. As your colleague was mentioning just now, there are 5 agreements that was signed between India and China in 1993, 1996, confidence building measures. Then 2005, political parameters and guiding principles, 2012, 2013. Now, why did it move, come in with all these forces, 50, 60,000 troops, with heavy equipment, armory, tanks, aircrafts to the border regions, to the border areas? It has not been able to explain so far. And what it really wants is that the relationship between the two countries should continue normally, that the boundary question should be put in what it calls the appropriate position. That means it should not intervene at all as far as the rest of the bilateral relations are concerned in terms of development of commercial relations, investments, etc. But India's position is very different, that the relations between the two countries will be determined by the situation that prevails in the border. If there is peace and tranquility on the border, then only we can have normal relations. And I think the ball is very squarely in the court of China. We see not only in the area of this border, bringing all these troops there, but you look at so many other areas, you know, whether it is India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, it is India's membership of the UN Security Council, it is, you know, China is trying to reach out to India's neighbors to create a string of pearls around it and not allow India to play its due role as far as international affairs are concerned. So it is trying to constrict and restrict in India in every sense of the word. So I think it has to, as I said, you know, the first move has to be taken by China to reassure India that its, you know, activities are not being restricted, not being hampered, and China does not want to play the role of a hegemon in Asia by restricting. We want to have a relationship of equals. That obviously China does not want, and China will have to make its intent and sincerity clear before we can really have business as usual. What has happened on the 18th yesterday, this is a baby step. This is a small step. These are low-hanging fruits that existed. But I think a lot more hard work will need to be done if we have to go to more substantive things. The last point that I'd like to make is, in terms of the de-escalation and de-induction that you're talking, I think that will really come up in the meetings of the military commanders, because they are also likely to meet. You know, first the SRs have met, then the foreign secretaries will meet, the foreign ministers will also meet, and then of course the MCC, the working mechanism on cooperation and coordination, and the military commanders, they are also going to meet. So I think it's going to be a whole process, but it is good. This meeting is taking place after 5 years. It is the first step. It's an important step, but as I said, it's a baby step.
All right, let me take this question to Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. He's not there with us. Let me come back to you, Nivriti, at this point. I think it's important to you know, put this in perspective of what really has transpired, and there have been multi-level meetings. And as you know, Ambassador pointed out, that this is the start. It's a baby step. It's a low-hanging fruit. What happens here on?
Look, what happens here on is, the fact of the matter is, when I had traveled to the LAC, and I observed what is happening on the LAC.
Right.
Not only on our side, but on China's side as well, across LAC. So they are developing their frontier at a pace which is unprecedented. They have developed, in fact, they are far ahead from us, what we are doing. And the recent Pentagon report that has come up says that they are still maintaining the presence of their soldiers, their men in on the frontiers along LAC, and also they are focusing on building infrastructure on the LAC. So in Eastern Ladakh sector, it is happening all across LAC, whether it is in northern sector, whether it's in middle sector, or it is on the eastern side. So they are maintaining it. That means they are preparing for any eventuality, any eventuality. And that is what India is also doing, because because there is lack of trust. India is also building, although we are trailing, we are behind them, but we are also doing it at an unprecedented rate. So you must be knowing that prior to 2020, the number of men in uniform on the LAC were around 10,000 or so, and after 2020 the number of soldiers was raised to around 68 to 70,000. So that is a huge number, which is there. So before the de-escalation starts, this is the thing that needs to be reduced. The number of soldiers needs to be reduced. But now after the build up of infrastructure along the LAC, how feasible will it be? How will you be willing to take that infrastructure off, because you have already built it, or you will think of maintaining the number of soldiers, and you will think of developing your borders more and more, so that you are, because we don't trust
China. You're prepared
China
for any eventuality?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's take that question from Lieutenant General Kulkarni, who's back with us on the show. I think, Lieutenant General Kulkarni, you must have heard my colleague speaking, and she's been to the LAC, and she talks about her experience of not just a massive build-up by the way of, the two militaries on both sides, but also infrastructure. And that infrastructure, unless both countries decide to slowly go back, it will not be left unattended. How does one really achieve complete de-escalation and de-induction, if at all? Do you think it's even possible right now with the kind of build-up that we've seen in the past couple of years?
Thank you very much. I heard the ambassador say the ball is in China's court. There is no denying the fact. And as rightly, even the panelists very clearly stated that they have not actually adhered to the agreements that have been signed, right from the confidence building measure to the peace and tranquility along the LAC. In that sense, if you see, well, much that there might be Mansarovar yatra, river sharing bed agreement, border talks, everything, border trade, that all may be fine. But as a soldier, what is it that I look forward to? That's very important. If the relations between India and China soften, they get better, what does it mean? Honestly speaking, well, there's a trust deficit. And that trust deficit is a huge trust deficit, because obviously over the years, since 49 till date, the way the Chinese have sort of conducted themselves, not at all, you could say, with a sense of this thing, it's always been, distrust on both ends. If that be so, what is it that I achieve? Probably the Chinese have realized India seems extremely sensitive when it comes to border, rightly so, and they would rather take baby steps, but improve their trade, improve their diplomacy, try and tell the world that things are improving. But if there is trust deficit, how much? It's constant verification. Constant verification. Constant verification means you are on tenterhooks. How does it affect a soldier? It hasn't mattered at all, because his infrastructure has come up, his troops have moved in, entire thing has been done up. There are dual purpose villages that are coming up all over. What is it that we see? Now, if we have to be there at all times in the strength that has been already stated, then where does it help us? Yes, only thing is, probably I may stand up on my bunker and be able to, I know there won't be any firing and there's nothing much happening. But because of the trust deficit, there's nothing very much happening on the ground, or in terms of what you stated, de-escalation or de-induction. That I don't see. The Chinese are quite happy keeping the Indians on tenterhooks. Chinese are quite happy to ensure that the trade carries on from $125 billion to probably $150 or $200 billion. China knows that the only way is to give this little lollipops, okay, open the Mansarovar yatra, open up the border trade and things of those kinds. But the real problem between India and China is to have peace and tranquility along the LAC. If this peace and tranquility is being maintained with the same level, well, after all, you trust. How much can you trust? You have to verify. And that verification is constant verification. There is no end to that verification. Every day you have to go to those border points, see everything, come back again, see. That's not the way it should be. If
Right.
they are neighbors, there ought to be some trust, and that trust deficit is huge. It would take time to build up, and hopefully China has to walk the talk. China has to conduct itself in a manner that it ensures that the trust has to be built. And the Chinese have lost trust. Let's be very honest about it. The Chinese have lost trust, and they have. As the ambassador rightly said, the ball is in their court. We are willing, and provided, of course, not at the cost. The trade, we will increase the trade, we will do this, we will do that, everything seems hunky-dory. But for the poor soldiers on ground, no change whatsoever along the LAC. And well, I would put it that way, that trust but verify, but this constant verification is keeping everybody on tenterhooks positively, because they are doing what they want to do at a time of their choosing, and they are absolutely bang on. They are there with the troops,
Right.
they are there with the equipment, they are there with the infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think although the steps that both countries are taking right now, Nivriti, and by the way of that 6-point peace consensus that two countries have arrived at, I think it's important from a people-to-people perspective, where there is exchange of culture, there's exchange of trade, as Lieutenant General Kulkarni pointed out, that much may not change for soldier on ground, but at least the start of the Mansarovar yatra, the trade routes through Nathula, these are important measures, because these ensure that the trust building exercise has now begun.
Yes, this is, in my opinion, this is only a kind of a trust building exercise, and maybe the trust, when the trust is built, that is also a question, and if it is built and they don't break it again, that is also one of the questions. But I would like to ask Ambassador Sir, is it possible that because they are not doing very well on many fronts, like they are entangled in South China Sea, they have conflict with many countries in the South China Sea, and they are also not doing very well economically, is this a possibility that they want to first of all resolve all those issues and keep India waiting till they attack again, or till they come and try to ingress through our territory again? Is there a possibility, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Nivriti. I think you are very right, but you really left the most important component and consideration that I think China would have in its mind, and that is the arrival of Trump 2.0. Because, all these aspects that you have mentioned in terms of the economy not doing well, in terms of domestic disquiet, etc., in terms of, the fact what is happening, the responses to their aggressive attitude in the South China Sea, whether it is by Philippines or by some of the other countries. And in terms of, what some of the other plurilateral instruments like the Quad are operating there. But I think in addition to all that, I think what has really made them worried is the fact that Mr. Trump will be taking over in just about a month's time or so. Next 20th of next month, he'll be taking over. And the sort of comments that he has made in terms of imposing either 60% tariffs on Chinese goods or 100% if they try to route their goods through Mexico or something of that sort. So I think they are very worried, and you would recall that from the Chinese authorities, the message that had come was that India and China need to work together to effectively deal with the uncertainty and the turmoil that Mr. Trump's second tenure is going to bring. Right. And so I think that definitely is an element also. They don't want to keep maybe this end, continuously boiling. They want it to cool down for some time, because they don't want too many sort of issues that are, that they have to contend with. It is South China Sea, it is their economy, it is Taiwan, it is some of the others, it is Mr. Trump. So that is why I think it might be a tactical pause as far as China is concerned right now. I'd like to I agree with everything that General Kulkarni had said, of course, I would just like to make one comment there. He said, trust but verify. I think I would like to reverse that and say verify and then only trust. Because I don't think with China, trust can come first. We have trusted them. We have always trusted them, and we have been taken for a ride. And I think we have also learned our lessons. And I think China also would have realized over the last 4.5 years, and I'm sure there is no better person than General Kulkarni to further verify that, in terms that our infrastructure has become, we have built upon that, and we have stood firm in face of the Chinese threat, and we have forced them to reconsider and to go back. So it is not through any feeling of brotherliness or fraternity that they have decided to go back.
Absolutely.
But they have found that India is very strongly positioned there, and they will not be able to do anything to dislodge us from there. And that is why they have, in addition to the other aspects that we've been talking about, that discretion is the better part of valor, and it is best for them to retreat rather than to continue there. They have also been on the borders for 5 years now. This will be the 5th winter.
Right.
So they also must be feeling the pinch of that.
Absolutely. Lieutenant General Kulkarni, I think I'll end with this one last question to you, and that is, I think as Ambassador rightly pointed out, this is out of no brotherly feeling of goodwill towards India, but perhaps a compulsion of sorts right now, where a Trump administration in lingering high tariffs, high taxes, and anti-China rhetoric, problems with the Red Sea, and obviously the other border issues that China is facing, it's best set to not have a confrontation with India, because India has not emerged as a feeble leader, rather a strong leader which sustains its position along the border. So best sort it out at the place and the time of their liking, which is what China has done. But I think it's also in their interest to not meddle with India, at least in the interim.
Absolutely. All that you've said is 100% right. So therefore, only disengagement, just to show, because you've gone back, say, 8-10 kilometers, because the infrastructure is already there. But as regards the de-escalation is concerned, well, there is no de-escalation from that point of view. De-induction, probably never. And what China would want to keep India constantly under pressure. Keep India on tenterhooks. When I say trust but verify, that is what we would expect, but they wouldn't. So that is why I'm saying this trust, but no trust and constant verification. I think that is what keeps both sides, and more than anything else, our side constantly on tenterhooks. That's not acceptable. And therefore, definitely what the ambassador said, the arrival of Trump is what is causing worry to the Chinese in all terms. But notwithstanding, the Chinese have an $18 trillion economy. They have a per capita GDP of over $14,000 US. India has only a $4 trillion economy. We only have a 2,500 per capita GDP. So there is a lot to catch up. There is no denying fact. We would much want better relations with China, but Chinese cannot dictate. And that is what they've been wanting to say, that yes, everything else will go. Their trade will grow, everything will grow. But when it comes to peace and tranquility along the border, well, it would be what they want. And this, at this point of time, disengagement the way they want, but no de-escalation from the point of a soldier is concerned. What would he do? He would still be doing the same job. That is what is important.
So in 2-3 years, another 2020, if it happens, you should not be surprised.
All right. All right. And by the way, it will not be in China's best interest as well, because we're not going anywhere away. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Nivritti, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us on this discussion. The biggest NPAs, or the non-performing assets and loan defaults, are from personal loan and credit card segments. Now, this according to an RTI response from the Reserve Bank of India. The personal loan segment has gone up by 51% from March of 2023 to June of 2024. And the credit card NPAs have also shot up 136% from March of 2020 to June of 2024. Now, credit use is rising rapidly, and so are NPAs. The value of credit card transactions has also tripled in the last 3 years. During the year ending March 2024. The banks have touted their success in reducing NPAs over the last 2 years, but at the same time, these are the segments which are suffering when it comes to NPAs. Personal loans and credit cards, NPAs are on the rise. What's leading to this trend? Joining me to discuss are directors of Indian Institute of Finance, Professor Aman Agrawal. Also with me currently is Lloyd Matthias. He's an angel investor and business strategist and independent director as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much, the two of you, for taking time out. I want to come to you first, Professor Agrawal. What are we making, of these trends? Now, this, of course, is by the way of RBI data, which goes on to suggest that although NPAs are going low, it's the personal loan and the credit card segment which is currently a pain point when it comes to non-performing assets, or rather, individuals' ability to pay back.
You see, I agree that the numbers are alarming in terms of percentages which you're talking about, but it's a question of the magnitude of the amount which is there as well. So unless we have the absolute number or what is the kind of magnitude you're looking at, then it doesn't become a concerning area, specifically because the loans which NPAs have been created in the past are tantamounting to actually corporate loans and loans which have been given to farmers or industries or MSMEs or entrepreneurs, which run in lakhs and crores and not in few 100,000 rupees or maybe a few lakhs. And that is where the difference is. Secondly, in case of credit card loans, even if someone defaults for a day or two, one ends up paying a huge chunk of money because the interest rates are tantamounting to 50, 51, 60% from card to card, which is varying. And as a result, the bank ends up making a lot of money. So in case there is a default more than a specified period, a few days, they normally stop the credit card as well. So that is something which the banks always do, and it doesn't really make a worry even if it is 100, 130 or 140%, because it is the absolute value which is important. That is how many lakh crores is the one which is defaulting and not the percentage here.
All right, I have some numbers here, Professor Agrawal. If you could help us understand whether these numbers look substantive to you. So in personal loan segment, NPAs have gone up 51% from 7,422 crore rupees as of March of 2023 to 11,210 crore rupees, which is about 1.16% in June of 2024, from 0.93% in March of 23 to 1.16% in June of 2024. Does that number now, that figure looks bad to you?
It does not look too much alarming to me, because it's only going from 7,000 crores to 11,000 crores, which is not so much of, given the size of the banking and the way digital transactions and credit transactions have gone up. This number is not alarming. As I said again, you see, there's a definition of an NPA which defines it in terms of number of days one has defaulted in terms of payment.
Right.
This number is quite small as compared to the total NPAs you were just compared when you began the story about the NPAs being reduced, where the banks have been telling RBI that the number of NPAs which had been generated, which used to be in lakhs and thousands of crores. It is not few thousand crores, it used to be lakhs and thousands of crores. Each industry, each company at times defaulting to 300, 400, 500, 5,000 crores, where the defaults used to be there. So that is a fairly large, and which is only one organization which was defaulting, a few, select few, 10, 15, 20, 30 organizations defaulting, not a number where, there are lakhs of people who are actually taking this credit and defaulting. So the recovery rate generally in case of personal loans as well as credit cards is much superior as compared to, the loans which are given to corporates, or large chunk of loans which are given to industry or even to farmers, as a matter of fact. If you really look at the credit history and the NPA structure between 2000, almost 2003-4 to about 2014 or so, or 15, I would say, on an average about 4.5 lakh to 5.5 lakh crores was being given as a waiver by Government of India, by different governments in power, every year against year. out of which roughly about 45 to 55% was nothing else but farm waivers which were granted. You can imagine the kind of NPAs which were getting generated and sponsored through your and my taxpayers' money by the central bank and the governments in the past. So that number has gone down to almost 50%, and that's where the major chunk of concern is. So as I said, the percentage is alarming, which you just mentioned, and it is a cause of concern. And I'm happy that your channel is highlighting this issue, and the RBI would become active in terms of getting it up. But it is not a grave concern given the fact that we are moving to a digital economy in the last 5-6 years.
Okay, since we talked about personal loan, I also briefly want to touch on credit cards because NPAs here have shot up 136% from 2,404 crore rupees from 2020 to about 5,679 crore rupees as of June of 2024. Lloyd Matthias, this is not a substantive number, sir. When we look at loans and NPAs that are doled out to corporates, as Professor Agrawal pointed out, at the same time, it is alarming because as we get more digitized and people like you and me with perhaps not a huge buying capacity, people like us who are taking maybe smaller loans, who are buying gadgets, electronic items, essential items through our credit card, this reflects a trend on our ability to pay back.
Okay, so quickly, I just want to touch upon, I think, an important point that Professor Agarwal made. I think the reality is, and I heard your numbers loud and clear, that NPAs in personal loans have gone up 51% from 7,400 to 11,000 crores. I would just want to reiterate the fact that that's still very, very marginal in the context of the holistic bank NPAs. Now, the Reserve Bank has bragged about the fact that bank NPAs have come down from almost 7 lakh crores in March 22 down to less than 4.5 lakh crores. So I think the personal loan NPAs are still very marginal. And I also take into account the fact that, as Professor Agarwal mentioned, a lot of farm loan waivers, electricity waivers, and so on, have a much bigger negative impact on the economy. So it is a concern. Having said which, I think what we are seeing right now in the growth of credit card loans and defaults thereof, I think is symptomatic of a larger issue. It's a fact that younger Indian consumers are beginning to use or kind of depend less on savings as a generation ago. The generation that grew up through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they came out of an economy of shortages, right? So everything was about saving, about providing for the next generation. I think newer generation consumers, millennials and Gen Z in specific, are living more here and now. So the concept of an asset-light lifestyle, why do I need to own a house when I can rent one? Why do I need to own furniture when I can lease it? And so on and so forth. I think that's become more common. The concern, though, of course, is that a lot of this is belief that they will have a guaranteed income for life, right? And I guess at your 20s and 30s, you don't really look at the long term. But I think somewhere along the idea that you need to save up a bit, you need to grow your wealth, you need to grow a corpus, I think that thinking needs to come in. Some part of that has also got accentuated by the booming stock markets. I know of 20-somethings right now who think nothing of doing a little day trading to make enough money for the weekend out or, for a night out in town. But therefore, that old Indian culture of saving everything and, kind of investing it in the most safest assets, starting with fixed deposits, gold, and maybe over time buying a house or buying an asset, I think that is diminishing. And to my mind, while it's an early trend, I think it's something that could change the face of the country in the next 20, 30 years, right? So while what you're pointing out is right, it is a concern, it's small enough right now, but it's also the beginning of a trend that could be in the long term quite harmful to the economy.
All right, Professor Agrawal, do you agree with that? I know these are small numbers vis-a-vis the large loans that banks dole out to corporates and other companies, but at the same time, we're talking about small loans. We're talking about a class that does not have the income that big investors, big companies have. So is this a trend concerning to you when you look at the percentage? And this also coincides largely with data that is coming out around indebtedness, the growing indebtedness of middle class and lower middle class families. When you look at this data, along with the data on indebtedness, is that something that worries you?
You see, this is the indebtedness component, as highlighted by my colleague just now, is something which has become a trend now. And this is a trend which we have seen in more big cities, tier 1, tier 2 cities now, which used to be contained to tier 1 cities earlier. And still, there is a large chunk of population which lives in rural India, which actually contributes maximum to the saving component in terms of the India saving component, which we look at. So there is a balance still there in terms of saving, but certainly that is a way of life, a trend which is there, which we have seen in the West, in Europe, and the US, has come up to be there today with the Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, even in Tier 3 cities to a great extent now. Tier 4 cities are still, isolated from this particular effect. However, when you come to these numbers, as I said earlier, the percentages certainly look alarming. On a smaller component, they're also important to be considered, and the Reserve Bank, the banks need to look at it. However, they need to be also consideration, like let us take a loan of, which is a very popular case of Kingfisher Airlines, about 11,000 some crores, which was defaulted there. But you see, that already had a backup of what? Airlines which are lying, which they could sell off. Plus, then they attacked the personal assets of Vijay Mallya, which were tantamounting to about 13,000 plus crores. So naturally, that would naturally get covered therein. Although they could not have done it technically as per the accounting norms of private limited and public limited companies. Limited liability concept shields an owner. However, the government went in because of the public money which was involved in this. However, in these personal and as well as credit card loans, I don't know, the trend is that when you default on a credit card, not only that your CIBIL score goes down, but also the fact that other credit cards, they generally have a connection. Most banks have a connection within the credit card wings of the security and cyber and other issues, where if someone is defaulting, the highest defaulters list is circulated, and then their other credit cards are also blocked simultaneously. In case of a personal loan also, normally one does not get getting a personal loan is difficult. I'll tell you my own personal case. I had fixed deposits. I wanted to seek some personal loan from a bank where I had huge chunk of money against fixed deposits, just to seek and get an idea of how personal loan works. I applied for a personal loan of only about 1 lakh rupees, whereas I had kept roughly about 40-50 lakh rupees in that bank. Now you can imagine, where I have deposits, I wanted only ₹1 lakh loan, and the loan processing officer called and said, we can give you a business loan, but we cannot give you a personal loan, despite that I had such a huge chunk of money kept in fixed deposits. Now, getting the personal loan is not an easy task. Normally, banks generally give the personal loan also against an asset, even like a housing loan, any other loan which is backed by an asset. So that is why banks are not so much worried about these loans, because there is a backing asset which generally is there with some of these loans which are given out, which is not the case with the corporate loans per se, where you do have some security, but that security value may be hyped up, like in case of letter of credits, in case of Kingfisher, and a couple of other cases which we have seen in the past, where they were false credit lines which are given out based on false information in balance sheets. But in these cases, there are actual assets which are at stake, and as a result, these do not become an alarming factor per se, because bank has a recourse of capturing the asset. And many a times, the valuation done by the bank is always less than, almost I would say about 2/3 less than the real market value of that asset which they're actually pledging it against. We have seen that personally with a couple of cases which I have known, where the banks tend to keep the value low while giving out some of these kind of personal loans or even housing loans per se. So from that perspective, these loans are fairly largely secure. A small component, I would say about 8 to 10%, because of negligence or a misconvenience with the managers might be there, that there may be about 10-15% of the total loan portfolio which is defaulting, which you're talking about, which might be actually totally really bad, or as we used to call toxic loans in the past, when this NPA problem started coming up post 2000 and all, after the financial crisis happening around the world. But toxic assets have not been so high, and that's where it's not a major concern area, and that's why RBI also does not look at it so carefully.
All right. Lord Matthias, I think one of the conversations you and I have had over the past 1 year is vis-a-vis the personal loan growth, the segment of personal loan growth and the credit card growth in the country to the tune of about 13 to 14% each respectively. And now we're also looking at the NPAs, building up in these two segments. And I don't know if the proportion is the same. It clearly looks like credit card NPAs are far higher when compared to the growth of credit cards in the country. Does that really tell you about perhaps the link lingering inequality in India as well? Because a lot of people, when looking at this data, will go on to tell you that while on one hand, NPAs of large corporations seem to be going down. So it could be one of the two situations. A, their ability to pay back is better than, users' ability, like individual ability to pay back. One. Number two, it could just be that banks are very careful before doling out loans to large corporations, given that we've had a history of, building NPAs. In your assessment, is this a trend that also goes on to talk about large inequality in India?
Before I get deep into that, I just want to make one little comment to recognize that India's savings rate peaked at 2021. And soon after the pandemic, the savings rate has declined. Right? We're talking of saving rates falling to 18.4% in 2022-23. So clearly we're reaching a point where banks will have to fight for deposits, right? You recognize that interest rates have come down. A lot of new age consumers would rather put their money into mutual funds. Some of them do direct trading. You've seen a huge jump in the number of mutual fund investors. We've seen a huge jump in the number of people trading online to various online apps, the Grows, the Zerolas of the world. I think all that is resulting in people looking at alternate financial instruments outside the state-owned bank deposits, which was, for 99% of India, the first and only port of call when it came to savings. So I think that trend is accelerating. People are beginning to see much faster returns, or shall we say higher returns, when it comes to things like mutual funds and stocks. Albeit there could be a caution that there could be a meltdown at any point in time. But I think that's resulting in banks not being the first port of call for a lot of younger and newer generation Indians across the spectrum, be it urban India or, as Professor Agarwal pointed out, down to tier 1, 2, and 3 cities. So I think that's one aspect. The second aspect clearly is lifestyles, that younger consumers want to live a lifestyle in the here and now. Right? I don't need to earn and save up for a holiday that I want to go much later in life. If I want to go to a great destination, I want it, and I want it now.
Yeah,
right?
the culture of YOLO, the culture of YOLO that we discussed earlier as well.
Yes, yeah, you only live once. You want to make the most of it. So people are putting money down on the credit card and saying, okay, I'm going to go for a great holiday. I might end up paying for it for the next 3 years, but so be it. But that's the nature of how I want to live. So I think that's the other aspect that's coming through. And the third clearly is also pointing to a section of India that is highly unequal, right? The fact that corporate earnings are growing, or not corporate earnings aren't growing, but at least people working in corporates are getting much higher income. And there's a part of India that's possibly being left behind. Now, there are various data streams, difficult to believe one set, but I clearly think that we have to be concerned about the issue of inequality. But at the same time, we have to recognize that younger people will not, like a generation ago, save up before spending for that big car, for that great holiday, for having a fantastic experience, so watching their favorite concerts, be it Bryan Adams or Coldplay. And I think that's a recognition of a changing generation and something that we have to come to terms with.
Okay, so it could be a cultural change, is also reflective of how people are saving today. Before I close this show, I want to come to you, Professor Agarwal, for one last question. A variety of factors at play here. We're of course discussing financialization of savings on one hand, which is also at an all-time low. At the same time, we're looking at bad loans growing from personal loan segment, from credit card. When you put together these trends, they're reflective of the consumption pattern and the consumption habit of younger people today. B, it also perhaps is a lesson from where India is going to head from here on, something that perhaps we need to dig deeper into.
No, I agree with you. As I said earlier, that the fact that you're raising this issue is an important concern and an area of concern which has been looked upon. Small errors and small problems can lead to a bigger problem, and which could be systemic in nature. And this is what is actually seen in the West, specifically in the United States in particular, where people are living on their future incomes to the extent of 110%, 115%, many, on an average, which is there. Some people live to about 200% of their incomes, and which does not bring in a good framework of sustainability and survival, which is important for the system and the economy and the civilization per se. So that is very true what you have pointed out, and I think it's an important concern which I hope gets highlighted through your channel for banks and even for the Reserve Bank of India, that irrespective of what quantity of loan it may be, but it also needs to be looked upon as an NPA and should be considered as an NPA of matter of concern. Having said that, the important point you raise is also there, and I think that is a very valid point why we are seeing the NPAs of corporates falling down also, is the point that the lending behavior of banks has actually changed in the last 4 or 5 years in particular. Many companies, small, large, mid-size, are not getting fundings and financing from banks in the last 4 or 5 years. And so the banks are not financing these funds. They're in fact keeping them as deposits with the Reserve Bank of India or other
Right.
places, on a safer side. And that is where their NPA levels have actually come down also to substantial levels, given that they're playing safe instead of actually financing. And that's where
Right.
we can see that the growth trend, which India should observe in a normal course, we should actually cross around 8 or 9 or 10%, given the ability we have, the capabilities and the structures, and the fact that the world is looking at India as a manufacturing hub, as a
Right.
hub, lot of other activities.
Professor Agarwal,
going on.
Professor Agarwal, as important this conversation is, and as much as I would like to carry on, I think this will be another discussion for another day. Thank you very much, sir, for taking time out, for joining us. Lloyd Matthias as well. Thank you. Always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, gentlemen.